On the 2021 Hulu miniseries that Rick Rubin did with Paul McCartney called McCartney 321, there's a fascinating moment when Paul just sort of takes a step back from all the Beatles discussion that Rick Rubin wanted to have and just thought about his position and the uniqueness and magic of the position that life had afforded him as a member of the Beatles. And John Lennon comes to mind for him, and he says to Rick, you know, when I was in the moment of being an active Beatle and creating this songbook that we made together, I was just working with this bloke, John. But now in retrospect, I understand that I wasn't just working with John. I was working with John Lennon. And you could see in his facial expressions, you could see in his body language how much this meant to him to have recognized, to have in retrospect come to this realization of just how special it was to have worked with an icon, with a legend, with a genius in John Lennon, not just John, not just one of the Fab Four, but John Lennon, the one and only. And to have been his songwriting partner for all those years in the 60s. You could just tell how much gratitude there was in Paul's words and in the feeling behind them. In the mini doc that you can now find on YouTube about the making of this brand new Beatles song we have to talk about called Now and Then, which I'll link to in the description, Paul carries that note of gratitude a step further. He says this: all of those memories come flooding back. My God, he says, how lucky was I to have those men in my life and to work with those men so intimately and to come up with such a body of work. And the gratitude he expressed there. Obviously, this is a particular point of reflection for Paul at this stage in his life here in his 80s, looking back on the incredible life that he has had, the impact of it, the productivity that he has pursued for so many decades now. Obviously this appears to be something that Paul's thinking about a lot here at the end of his life. And it made me think of an interview I watched with Tom Petty where a similar note of gratitude comes up as Tom Petty, too, is thinking back on the life that he had lived in music. And he's talking about having met a couple of the members of the band that became the Heartbreakers. Ben Montench, the keyboardist piano player, and Mike Campbell, the guitarist, who became pretty much every bit as legendary as Tom himself, not just with his work with Tom, but with Don Henley and others. And Tom is talking about how Benmont he got to know because either he knew of or had himself heard Ben's ability to play a full Beatles album from start to finish on piano flawlessly. And in Mike's case, it was that Mike, in the Gainesville area where they were growing up, had put an ad on, stuck it to a cork board in the record store about how he was looking for a band to play guitar for. And Tom goes over to his house to meet him. He finds Mike at the house he's living in with his parents. They meet in the living room. They play a Chuck Berry song together. I think it might have been Johnny Be Good. And that was that. Mike became Tom's songwriting partner for the rest of Tom's life. And at one point in that interview, Tom just looks at the camera and throws his hands up and says, I don't know, two of the greatest musicians who ever lived just walked into my life. And it's as if he's saying, you tell me how that happened. You know, the mystery of circumstance almost spooks Tom as he looks back on the happenstance with which his band came together to make the music that only they together could have made as a unit. And this kind of sort of, bemused detachment that Paul and Tom express in these moments, which gives them pause, should also give us pause. Because think about it. How lucky are we that these men came into one another's lives and that they devoted those lives to the work that they produced? We too are so fortunate to be sitting here talking about a new Beatles track in 2023 Now and Then, which has its roots going back 30 years when the Beatles are putting their both volumes of their anthologies out in around 1994. They got their hands through Yoko on some John Lennon demos, and they got together. George was still with us. He died in 2001, so this is even years before his death. So Paul, George, and Ringo get together, and they get their hands on songs that ultimately become Real Love and Free as a Bird. Real Love is a really nice Beatles track. It's a track I come back to this day. It's got that nice polished Jeff Lynne shuffle on it with Ringo's drums. George's guitar work is lovely on that track. So, at the same time as Real Love and Free as a Bird, they also got their hands on Now and Then. They've been aware of this demo for more than about 30 years now. But they were struggling with it because they couldn't separate John's vocals from the piano. And as Paul puts it in the video doc about the making of Now and Then, whenever we wanted more of John's voice, we also had to get more of John's piano because we couldn't separate the two, and that's not what they wanted. So ultimately they gave up on it for the time being, and it languished in a cupboard, as Paul puts it, until now, when Peter Jackson, who made the wonderful Get Back documentary in 2021, around November, that came out, using all of that footage of the recording sessions that ultimately became the album Let It Be, tells Paul that he's got this way now, using machine learning, using AI, to go ahead and extricate John's vocals from his piano playing. This was a big aha moment for Paul and Ringo, who now had the opportunity to mix the song the way they always wanted to. They feed John's vocals and piano together into this machine learning program, and the program goes ahead and separates them. And from there, Paul's able to slap some bass on it. Ringo puts his drums on it. Paul, using guitar work that George Harrison had created around the Now and Then demo decades ago, ends up playing some slide in the manner of that George Harrison guitar solo, and does a lovely job of it. As he says in the doc, it's like a tribute to George, and it plays with all of the love and reverence that implies. And so here we are in 2023 with the luxury of talking about this new track. And by the way, the most moving part of it for me is that the Beatles, with the remaining members of them, Paul and Ringo, got together with George Martin's son, Giles. Now, George Martin was the Beatles producer for most of their records. George Martin was the outright genius behind all those lovely string arrangements on Yesterday, I Am the Walrus, and Eleanor Rigby, and Strawberry Fields, all that stuff. That was all George Martin's doing. Well, Giles Martin, George's son, is following in Dad's footsteps, and they get together with George Martin's son, Giles, and put together a string arrangement for this new Beatles track, Now and Then. So it all comes full circle in all of these beautiful ways. And so here we are, pondering our own gratitude, just as Paul ponders his, at having been given the gift of having a hand in creating this music. And for me, the gratitude that we feel comes with an element of responsibility, because I believe, as lovers of this music, it is our responsibility to carry it forward. It is our responsibility to make sure it's not forgotten. It is our responsibility to push the memory of this music and the era it defined forward for generations to come. And that's why, good, bad, or indifferent, it doesn't matter necessarily what one thinks of Now and Then as a piece of music. The fact that it exists is the point. The fact that Paul and Ringo went out of their way to create this, what almost certainly will be the final Beatles song, in so doing, giving us the opportunity here in 2023 to do what I just described, to fulfill our responsibility to keep this music alive by giving us a fresh piece of Beatles music to talk about here in 2023. I am grateful. And to paraphrase Paul, for me, the bottom line is this: yes, Paul, how lucky are we?